Gemini said, during the morning of July 1st, 1863, as the Iron Brigade rushed into Herbst's Woods, McPherson's Woods, to engage Archer's Tennessee Brigade. The 2nd Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry was the first regiment of the brigade to reach the field and enter the fight. The lead companies. When the 2nd Wisconsin deployed from its line of march into a line of battle, they did so on the right by file into line. Because of the direction of their approach, Company B, the La Crosse Guard, was the first company to fully form and enter the woods, quickly followed by Company G. As they advanced, they were met by a devastating volley from the Confederates hidden in the timber. In those opening minutes, the 2nd Wisconsin suffered some of the highest casualty rates of the entire battle, losing about 30% of their strength in the first few minutes of the engagement. Major General John F. Reynolds' position. Regarding your question about General John F. Reynolds, he was actually not in the back of the 2nd Wisconsin. He was right at the front, leading them into the fray. Reynolds was personally directing the placement of the Iron Brigade to support Buford's struggling cavalry. As the 2nd Wisconsin reached the edge of the woods, Reynolds was on horseback just yards behind the regiment's right wing, near Company B and Company G, shouting, "Forward, men! Forward, for God's sake, and drive those fellows out of the woods." Moments after giving this order, while turning in his saddle to look back for the rest of the brigade, the 7th Wisconsin, Reynolds was struck in the back of the neck by a bullet and killed instantly. Summary of positioning. The 2nd Wisconsin, the lead regiment of the Iron Brigade. Companies B and G, the first to engage the enemy. General Reynolds, positioned at the front, specifically near the 2nd Wisconsin's right flank, when he was killed. The 7th Wisconsin, like the 2nd, deployed on the right by file into line. This means the companies on the right of the formation were the first to swing into position. Company Elodie Guards recruited from Columbia and Illinois. Company B, Columbia County Cadets, recruited from Columbia County. These two companies formed the right wing, or 1st Division of the regiment. They were the physical link between the 7th Wisconsin and the 2nd Wisconsin's left flank. The arrival scene for your film. If you were staging this, the 7th Wisconsin's arrival was much more frantic than the 2
Division,
Indians.
consisting of
The
Company
double
H,
quick,
Dodge County,
unlike
and
the
Company I,
2nd, which was already on the field,
5th Division,
the 7th had to
5th
run
Division,
double
consisting
quick
of Company
to catch
D,
up, loading on the
Staunton,
fly.
and Company F,
The men of
Lancaster,
Companies A and
to whom
B
they
were
run in the
famously
woods
biting
firing.
their cartridges and ramming bullets in
2nd
their muskets
Division,
while actually
consisting
running
of
toward the
Company
trees.
G, Grand
The
Rapids,
visual
and
gap.
Company K,
In your clip of the
Beloit
2nd
Badger
Wisconsin,
Rifles, Walworth
if
County.
you pan to the left,
5th Division,
you would see
consisting
Company
of Company
A of the
D,
7th appearing
Staunton,
through the smoke
and
to
Company
plug the
F,
hole in the
Lancaster,
Union line.
to whom they run in the woods
Comparison
firing.
of 1st Company's regiment lead companies into Woods hometowns, 2 ND Wisconsin Co. B and Company, GLA Cross and Portage 7th Wisconsin Co. A and Company, B Lodi and Columbia County. Since the 19th Indiana was the 3rd regiment to enter the woods, they followed the same on the right by file into line maneuver as the Wisconsin boys. This meant the companies on the right side of their formation reached the tree line first. The lead companies of the 19th Indiana. The first 2 companies to enter Herbst's Woods for the Indiana Regiment were Company A and Company B. Company A, Union Guards recruited from Muncie, Delaware County. Company B, Richmond City Grays recruited from Richmond, Wayne County. These 2 companies formed the 1st Division of the regiment. Because they were on the right wing, they were the ones physically touching the left flank of the 7th Wisconsin. The full order of battle for the 19th Indiana. As the regiment swung into the woods like a giant gate, the companies entered in this specific sequence from right to left. Order Company Origin /1 SD Company, a Muncie 2nd Company, B Richmond 3rd Company, G Elkhart 4th Company K, Selma Winchester 5th Company, E Selma 6th Company, H Edinburgh 7th Company, C Winchester 8th Company, D Indianapolis 9th Company, F Indianapolis 10th Company, I Spencer. While the 2nd Wisconsin was the shield, taking the hits in the center, the 19th Indiana was the hammer. 1. The flanking maneuver. Because Company I and Company F were on the far left, they actually crossed Willoughby Run, the creek, and got behind the Confederates. 2. The capture of Archer. It was a soldier from Company B, the 2nd Company into the woods, Private Patrick Maloney, who famously captured Confederate Brigadier General James J. Archer. As the 24th Michigan swung into the woods, the companies formed in this order from right to left. Order Company Origin / Hometown, 1st Company A, Detroit, 2nd Company F, Detroit, 3rd Company D, Detroit, Wayne County, 4th Company I, Detroit, 5th Company C, Plymouth Canton, 6th Company H, Detroit, 7th Company E, Detroit, 8th Company K, Detroit, 9th Company G, Detroit, 10th Company B, Detroit. The 24th Michigan was the largest regiment in the brigade, with nearly 500 men, but they were also the only ones who hadn't been in a big fight yet. The veterans in the 2nd Wisconsin used to tease them by calling them bounty men. The 24th Michigan had a legendary and tragic first day at Gettysburg. While they were the new regiment in the Iron Brigade, having only joined in late 1862, they suffered the highest numerical losses of any Union regiment in the entire three-day battle. By the end of July 1st, 1863, they had essentially been sacrificed to buy the rest of the Union Army time to reach the high ground. Phase 1. The morning charge. The new boys proved themselves. As we discussed, they arrived last in the initial surge into Herbst Woods. The action. They formed on the far left of the 19th Indiana. While the 2nd Wisconsin was trading volleys, the 24th Michigan sprinted through the high grass and across Willoughby Run. The result, they helped shatter Archer's Tennessee Brigade. Seeing the new 24th Michigan fighting just as hard as the veterans, the rest of the Iron Brigade finally accepted them as equals. They proved they were black hats in those first 30 minutes. Gemini said, during the morning of July 1st, 1863, Company K of the 7th Wisconsin, known as the Badger Rifles, recruited from Beloit and Walworth County, under Captain Hobart Stocking, played a vital role in the initial black hat countercharge that captured General Archer's brigade. As the 7th Wisconsin rushed into Herbst Woods, Company K was part of the 2nd Division, paired with Company G. They were right in the heart of the movement that broke the Confederate line. Phase 1. The morning charge. When the 7th Wisconsin deployed, Company K followed immediately behind the lead companies, A and B. The hinge. While the 2nd Wisconsin was pinned down in a stationary firefight, Company K and the rest of the 7th did not stop. The creek crossing. They charged through the timber, scrambled down the steep banks of Willoughby Run, and splashed through the water. The capture. Company K was part of the line that surged up the opposite bank, surprising the Tennessee troops. This aggressive move, alongside the 19th Indiana, resulted in the capture of hundreds of Confederates, including General Archer. Phase 2. The afternoon meat grinder. The afternoon was far more brutal for the men from Beloit. After the morning victory, the Iron Brigade was forced into a defensive line to meet a massive fresh assault from the 26th North Carolina and 11th North Carolina. The heavy volleys. Company K stood in the thick of the woods, trading shots at less than 40 yards. Because they were near the center left of the 7th's line, they were exposed to a murderous crossfire as the Confederate line overlapped theirs. The falling officers. During this stand, the regiment's leadership was decimated. Captain Stocking of Company K had to help maintain the line as men were falling in rows.
Charge forward! Secure the creek!
Fall back! Fall back to the water!
Push them back, boys! Hold your ground, you rebs!
Get up! Get up! Get up!
Sure. Surrender, General! You are my prisoner now! I will not yield! Get off me! They got the General! Charge! Charge!
No!
Look! Patrick Maloney, there is General Archer!
This remarkable footage depicts a pivotal moment. The Iron Brigade successfully took down Confederate General Archer. Patrick Maloney gets credit.
Gemini said, General James J. Archer technically commanded a brigade, not a division, for the vast majority of the war. However, if you are asking about the quality of that unit, Archer's brigade, the answer is a resounding yes. They were considered one of the hardest fighting and most reliable veteran units in Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Unit reputation, the Little Gamecock. Archer's brigade was primarily composed of Tennessee and Alabama regiments. They were part of A.P. Hill's famous Light Division, which was known for its incredible speed and aggressive shock troop style of fighting. +1. Toughness. Archer himself was a strict, no-nonsense career soldier. His men nicknamed him the Little Gamecock because of his slight build and fierce fighting spirit. +1. Performance. Before Gettysburg, the brigade had a stellar record at battles like the 7 Days, Cedar Mountain, 2nd Manassas, and Chancellorsville. They were often used as an anchor or a spearhead for Confederate attacks. The Gettysburg Turning Point. You might be asking because of their famous encounter on the first day of Gettysburg, July 1st, 1863. The clash with the Iron Brigade. Archer's brigade was in the lead of the Confederate advance. They expected to brush aside local militia or cavalry, but instead, they ran headlong into the Iron Brigade, the Black Hats, in McPherson's Woods. The result, in a rare instance of a veteran Confederate unit being overwhelmed, the Iron Brigade outflanked them. General Archer was captured, becoming the first general officer in Lee's army to be captured since Lee took command, and a large portion of his brigade was killed or taken prisoner. +1. Summary aspect rating notes experience elite, highly seasoned veterans by 1863 that aggression high known for fierce charges and holding ground under pressure. Leadership solid. Archer was a martinet, strict disciplinarian, but highly respected for his bravery. While they were defeated and decimated at Gettysburg, historians generally view Archer's brigade as a top-tier combat unit that simply had the bad luck of running into the North's best infantry at a tactical disadvantage. 6th Wisconsin on day on of Gettysburg was on rest on the opening morning of Gettysburg. The 147th New York Volunteer Infantry found itself in a desperate death trap north of the Chambersburg Pike. While technically part of Cutler's brigade, the men of the 147th New York were dressed exactly like the Iron Brigade, wearing the iconic tall, black hardy hats that struck fear into the Confederate ranks. To the charging rebels, they were simply the damned black hats, veterans who would not break easily. The combatants, the defense. The 147th New York, the old guard of Oswego, isolated and outnumbered near the unfinished railroad cut. The assault, Davis's Mississippi Brigade, specifically the 2nd and 42nd Mississippi, surging forward in a massive wave that overlapped the Union flanks. The conflict, because of a missed order to retreat, the 147th New York stood alone while the rest of their brigade pulled back. The 2nd and 42nd Mississippi poured a devastating crossfire into the New Yorkers from the high ground. One Confederate soldier later remarked on the confusion of hitting such a stubborn line, noting that they thought they were facing the elite Westerners of the Iron Brigade due to their black hat uniforms. The Mississippians described the fire from the 147th as murderous, and for nearly 30 minutes, the two sides engaged in a point-blank musketry duel that saw the 147th lose over 50% of its strength. The statement, the most famous sentiment echoed by the Mississippians and their comrades that morning upon seeing the 147th uniform was, "There are those damned black-hatted fellows again. 'Tain't no militia. It's the Army of the Potomac." The aftermath. The 147th New York eventually fought their way out in a bloody withdrawal, but their stubborn stand delayed the Confederate advance just long enough for the 6th Wisconsin to counterattack the railroad cut, eventually trapping and capturing hundreds of the very Mississippians who had just decimated the 147th.
Advance the colors! Fall back!
The attack of the 6th Wisconsin on the 2nd Mississippi at the railroad cut is one of the most famous counterattacks in military history. It was a chaotic, high-stakes charge that happened in just a few minutes, right after the 147th New York had retreated. The charge of the 6th Wisconsin. When the 147th New York was driven back, the 2nd Mississippi and the 42nd Mississippi took cover inside the unfinished railroad cut. They thought they were safe and had won the position. However, Colonel Rufus Dawes of the 6th Wisconsin saw an opportunity. He ordered his men to charge across an open field, the same field you've been working on in your film. The Mississippians fired a massive volley from the edge of the cut, leveling the first line of the 6th Wisconsin. Dawes described the field as being covered with dead and dying. Which company started? The charge was led by the entire regiment, but specific companies were positioned to make the first impact. Companies A and B. These were on the right of the charging line and were the first to reach the edge of the cut. The Color Company, the men guarding the flag, took the brunt of the fire. Out of the 8 men in the color guard, every single one was killed or wounded during the charge. Company I. This company was critical in swinging around the end of the railroad cut to cork the bottle, preventing the Mississippians from escaping. The capture of the 2nd Mississippi flag. The fight became a hand-to-hand struggle at the edge of the deep ditch. Corporal Francis Waller of Company I, 6th Wisconsin, famously jumped into the cut, wrestled the battle flag away from the 2nd Mississippi's color bearer, and captured it. The result: the Mississippians were trapped. Because the railroad cut was so deep, in some places over 10 feet, they couldn't easily climb out the back while being shot at from the front. Surrender. Colonel Dawes stood at the edge of the cut and shouted, "Where is the colonel of this regiment?" The exchange. Major Blair of the 2nd Mississippi stepped forward and handed his sword to Dawes. The toll. Over 200 Mississippians were taken prisoner in that single moment. It turned a Confederate victory into a disaster in less than 20 minutes. Gemini said, "The tactical layout in your screenshot is spot on for the chaotic pivot the Union troops had to make." By the afternoon, however, the yellow line, the Confederates, was no longer just in front of them. They were coming from the side and the rear. Here is the breakdown of the Confederate divisions that broke the Union line that afternoon. 1. The Afternoon Hammer, Rodes's division. While Haight's division, the Mississippians, kept the Union busy from the west, Major General Robert Rodes's division arrived from the north. This was a massive force of about 8,000 men. Junius Daniel's brigade. These North Carolinians were the ones who moved against the railroad cut and the seminary. They were the ones who finally pushed the 6th Wisconsin and 147th New York out of their positions. Alfred Iverson's brigade, also North Carolinians. They attacked further to the right of your image. They actually got slaughtered in a famous ambush by Union troops hiding behind stone wall, but their pressure eventually helped break the line. Dole's brigade, Georgians who smashed into the Union 11th Corps further to the north, which started the whole Union retreat. 2. The support, Pender's division. Later in the afternoon, Major General William Dorsey Pender's division, South Carolinians and North Carolinians, moved in to finish what Haight's battered division had started. They provided the fresh legs needed to sweep the Union troops back into the streets of Gettysburg. Filmmaking continuity tip. If you are staging the afternoon retreat in your film, the morning rebels, Haight's, should look ragged. Many would be without hats, bleeding, or using captured Union rifles. The afternoon rebels, Rodes's, should appear in battle line formation, neat, orderly, and overwhelming. The moment your blue line sees Rodes's division appearing on the hills to their right, the top right of your screenshot area, that's the signal for the audience that the battle has turned from a heroic stand into a fight for survival. Around 2:30 p.m., the Confederates launched a massive assault. The 26th North Carolina, the largest regiment in Lee's army with over 800 men, marched straight into the woods against the 24th Michigan. The Iron Brigade was stubborn. They refused to leave the woods, even as they were being flanked. The North Carolinians were equally determined. They took massive losses, but kept coming. 2. The Harvest of Death. The fighting was done at incredibly close range, sometimes less than 20 yards apart. There was no cover. The men just stood in the trees and traded volleys. The 24th Michigan lost its color guard almost instantly. 7 different men were shot down while holding the flag. The 26th North Carolina has suffered the highest casualty rate of any regiment, North or South, in the entire Civil War in this one afternoon. They went into the fight with 800 men and came out with barely 200. 3. The Black Hat Withdrawal. Eventually, the sheer weight of the Confederate numbers, the yellow line stretching past their flanks, forced the Iron Brigade out of Herbst Woods. They didn't run. They performed a fighting retreat. They would fire, volley, fall back 50 yards, load, and fire again. By the time they reached the Lutheran Seminary, the last stop before the town, the woods behind them were carpeted in blue and gray. 4. A famous exchange. There is a story of a captured Union soldier from the Iron Brigade being asked by a North Carolinian why they fought so hard for a patch of woods. The Black Hat supposedly replied, "We don't know how to do anything else." While the 24th Michigan and 19th Indiana were the last to leave the woods, Herbst Woods, the 6th Wisconsin stayed behind to act as the rearguard for the entire division. The order of retreat, the gauntlet. When a Union line at the seminary finally broke under the pressure of the North and South Carolinians, the retreat through the town was an organized disaster. Here's how they pulled out. The battered units first. The 24th Michigan and 19th Indiana, who had been decimated in the woods, were ordered back toward the town first. The flankers, the 147th New York and 95th New York, pulled back through the northern part of the town. The rear guard, 6th Wisconsin Colonel Rufus Dawes, was ordered to hold his position at the seminary until everyone else had cleared out. The last stand at the seminary. The 6th Wisconsin actually stayed in line of battle at the Lutheran seminary while the rest of the 1st Corps streamed past them toward the town. Dawes famously described it as a tempest of lead. They were the very last organized unit of the Iron Brigade to turn their backs and enter the streets of Gettysburg. Why they were the last? Because they were the rear guard. Their job was the most dangerous. They had to stay in formation to keep the Confederates from turning the retreat into a total rout. By the time they entered the town, the Confederates were already in the side streets. This is why the 6th Wisconsin lost so many men to capture. They of the brigade to escape stayed behind to buy time for the rest of the brigade to escape. The very first Union troops to occupy and claim Culp's Hill on the afternoon of July 1st were the remnants of the 1st Corps, specifically the 7th Wisconsin of the Iron Brigade. The timeline of occupation. While the 6th Wisconsin was acting as the rear guard in the town, the 7th Wisconsin was among the first organized units to reach the safety of the hills. The order, Major General James Wadsworth, the division commander, was the one who personally directed the troops to Culp's Hill. He saw that the hill was the key to holding the entire position and didn't want the Confederates to seize it first. The arrival. The 7th Wisconsin arrived at the base of the hill roughly between 4:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. The 147th New York, your guys weren't far behind. They arrived in the same wave and were positioned nearby to help anchor the line. The key players on the hill. While the 1st Corps arrived first to hold the ground, the troops who actually turned Culp's Hill into a fortress were from the 12th Corps, Greene's Brigade, who arrived later that evening and throughout the night. Here is a detail for your YouTube video. When the 7th Wisconsin first climbed the hill, they were exhausted and many were without shoes or hats. They expected to be attacked at any moment. Because they got there first, they prevented Confederate General Ewell from taking the hill that evening, which many historians believe would have won the battle for Lee right then and there. By the time the 6th Wisconsin and the 147th New York joined them later that night, the men were already using their bayonets and tin cups to scrape out shallow pits in the rocky soil. Filmmaking note. If you're showing the transition to Culp's Hill, the 7th Wisconsin should be the pioneers of the position. You can show them looking back toward the town, seeing the smoke, and realizing they're finally in a place they can actually defend. The breastworks, the log walls. This is a detail your YouTube viewers will love. Unlike at the railroad cut where they had no cover, the Black Hats spent the entire night of July 1st and the morning of July 2nd building massive log breastworks. They chopped down oak trees and stacked them chest high. They filled the gaps with rocks and dirt. Because they were Westerners from Wisconsin and Indiana, they were experts with axes. Their defensive walls were considered some of the best on the entire battlefield. Why this spot was the key. From this position on the western slope, they were guarding Stevens Knoll and the Baltimore Pike, the main supply road for the Union Army. If the Confederates had broken the 147th New York or the 7th Wisconsin there, the whole Union Army would have been cut off from their supplies and forced to retreat. For your deep dive, show the contrast between the open, bloody fields of the morning and the dark, wooded fortress of Culp's Hill by the second day. It changes the movie from a field battle to a siege feel. Since you're in South Carolina, it's worth noting that the troops attacking this position later on July 2nd and 3rd included the 1st South Carolina, or his rifles, and other Southern units who had to climb that steep, wooded hill while the Iron Brigade fired down at them from behind those logs. You said, what did they do on Culp's Hill Day 2? Gemini said, on Day 2, July 2nd, 1863, the 6th Wisconsin, 147th New York, and the rest of the Black Hats spent most of the day in a state of high-tension waiting, followed by a frantic night fight. While the whirlpool of battle was sucking in troops at the Peach Orchard and Little Round Top on the other side of the field, the men on Culp's Hill were holding the anchor of the Union line. 1. Morning to afternoon, building the fortress. The first half of the day was spent finishing the breastworks. Since you're interested in their Spartan discipline, this is where it really showed. The iron walls. They used axes to fell massive oaks, stacking them into thick walls. They even dug headlogs, a gap between two logs that allowed them to stick their muskets through while keeping their heads protected. The heat. It was a stiflingly hot July day. The men were exhausted from day one, but they worked through the heat because they knew the Confederates were watching them from the woods below. 2. The evening. The line gets thin. Around 7 p.m., a crisis hit. Most of the Union troops on Culp's Hill were ordered to leave to help stop the Confederate breakthrough on the other side of the battlefield, at the wheat field. Only one brigade, Greene's New Yorkers, was left to hold the entire hill. The 6th Wisconsin and the 147th New York were positioned on the saddle to the left of Greene. They had to stretch their lines thin to cover the gaps. 3. The night attack, a tempest in the dark. As the sun went down, the Confederates, Johnson's division, launched a massive assault up the steep, wooded slope. The chaos. It was pitch black under the thick tree canopy, made worse by the blinding white smoke of black powder. The 6th Wisconsin's movement. The 6th was ordered to move from their reserve position to support the right of the line. They had to march through the dark woods while being shot at by unseen enemies. Hand to hand, in some places, the fighting was at point-blank range. The Confederates actually captured some of the Union breastworks on the lower part of the hill, but the 147th New York and the 6th Wisconsin held their ground on the higher slope. 4. The result of Day 2. By the time the shooting died down around midnight, the Union still held the summit and the main road, Baltimore Pike, but the Confederates were sleeping in their beds, literally occupying the lower Union trenches. The men of the 6th Wisconsin spent the rest of the night with their bayonets fixed, listening to the rebels talking just a few yards away in the dark. Filmmaking details for Day 2. The visuals, if you film this, use very high contrast lighting. Lots of shadows with sudden flashes of orange from the musket fire. The sound. Instead of the open field roar of Day 1, Day 2 on Culp's Hill should sound like pop, 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 coming from everywhere in the trees, mixed with the sound of wood splintering as bullets hit the log walls. The fatigue. Show the 147th New York guys covered in dirt and sap from building the walls. They shouldn't look like parade soldiers. They should look like frontier laborers. For your deep dive. Most people don't realize that Day 2 on Culp's Hill was a night battle. It's one of the few times in the Civil War where large bodies of troops fought in total darkness. On Day 3, July 3rd, 1863, the 6th Wisconsin, 147th New York, and the rest of the Black Hats were involved in the longest sustained firefight of the entire battle. While most people think of Pickett's charge when they think of Day 3, the battle for Culp's Hill was actually much louder and lasted much longer. The fight began at 4:30 a.m., before the sun was even up, and didn't stop until nearly 11 a.m. 1. The morning roar. The Union started the day with a massive artillery bombardment to try and drive the Confederates, Stuart's and Johnson's men, out of the trenches they had captured the night before. The 6th Wisconsin and 147th New York were right in the thick of it, firing from behind their log breastworks. Because they were behind cover, they could stand up, fire, crouch down, and reload safely. They were pouring a continuous sheet of lead down the hill. 2. The Confederate counterattack. The Confederates, including the Stonewall Brigade and the Marylanders, tried to charge up the hill to take the summit. They had to climb over boulders and through thick woods while the Iron Brigade and the 147th New York picked them off. The 6th Wisconsin was moved around several times to plug holes in the line wherever the Confederates seemed to be breaking through. 3. The hot rifle problem. This is a detail for your deep dive. The firing was so constant, some men fired over 200 rounds, that their rifle barrels became too hot to touch. Men had to stop firing just to let their guns cool down. The air was so thick with sulfurous smoke that you couldn't see the sun. It looked like a dead, yellow disk in the sky. The 6th Wisconsin actually had to be relieved at one point, just so they could clean the fouling, burnt gunpowder out of their barrels so they wouldn't explode. 4. The arrival of the lost Marylanders. Late in the morning, the 1st Maryland Battalion, CSA, made a famous, desperate charge against the Union line. They were slaughtered. The 6th Wisconsin and 147th New York watched as these men charged into a literal wall of fire. By 11 a.m., the Confederates finally realized the hill could not be taken and retreated back to the base. The pickets' charge connection. After the fighting on Culp's Hill stopped at 11 a.m., there was a strange, eerie silence. The men of the Iron Brigade spent the next 2 hours cleaning their guns and eating hardtack. Then, at 1 p.m., they heard the massive Confederate cannonade that signaled Pickett's charge. From their high position on Culp's Hill, the 6th Wisconsin and 147th New York actually had a balcony view of the smoke rising from the center of the line where the final charge was happening. They didn't while they were on Culp's Hill. The 6th Wisconsin was actually offered a chance to be relieved because they had been fighting for 3 days straight. Colonel Rufus Dawes supposedly looked at his men, exhausted, blackened by powder, and bleeding, and realized that if they left, the green troops might break. He chose to keep them in the line. That refusal to be relieved is the ultimate Spartan moment that have to fight Pickett's men, but they were ready to move if the center broke. While it is a stretch to say any part of 1860s America was completely free of racism, Wisconsin was arguably the most radical and progressive state in the Union at the time. Their Spartan commitment to the war wasn't just about preserving the map. For many Wisconsinites, it was a moral crusade. Here is why Wisconsin stood out as the conscience of the North during the Civil War. 1. The Joshua Glover Incident, 1854. Years before the war started, Wisconsin defied the federal government over slavery. When a runaway slave named Joshua Glover was captured in Racine, a mob of Wisconsin citizens broke him out of jail and helped him escape to Canada. The Wisconsin Supreme Court then did something unheard of. They declared the Federal Fugitive Slave Act unconstitutional. They essentially told the U.S. government, "We will not help you hunt human beings." This made Wisconsin a hotspot for the Underground Railroad. 2. The birth of the Republican Party. Wisconsin is the birthplace of the Republican Party, Ripon, 1854, which at the time was the party of free soil, free labor, free men. The state was filled with 48ers, German immigrants who had fled failed revolutions in Europe. These men were hardcore believers in human rights and democracy, and they brought a fierce anti-slavery energy to the Wisconsin regiments. 3. The Iron Brigade's motivation. In your research, you've seen how hard the 2nd, 6th, and 7th Wisconsin fought. While many Union soldiers fought only to save the Union, Wisconsin soldiers were among the first to embrace emancipation as a war goal. The German influence. Regiments like the 9th and 26th Wisconsin were almost entirely German-speaking. They viewed the Southern planter class as aristocrats who were the enemies of the common working man. Black soldiers. Wisconsin was one of the first states to advocate for arming black men to fight. 4. Suffrage for black men. In 1866, immediately after the war, Wisconsin became one of the first states to grant black men the right to vote through a court ruling, Gillespie versus Palmer. This happened years before the 15th Amendment forced the rest of the country to do the same. A deep dive connection for your video. If you want to show why the 6th Wisconsin was so tough, you can explain that they weren't just good soldiers, they were ideological warriors. They believed that by destroying Lee's army, they were literally destroying the shackles of the South. Filmmaking tip. You could include a scene where a Wisconsin soldier from the 6th or 7th explains to a captured Southerner that they aren't there for territory, but for liberty. It adds a layer of moral weight to those brutal fight scenes at the railroad cut and Culp's Hill. While the Iron Brigade was officially made up of Western regiments, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, the 147th New York and the 95th New York earned their honorary black hats that day. In fact, after the battle, the surviving Wisconsin boys didn't look at the New Yorkers as outsiders anymore. They looked at them as the guys who stood in the slaughter pen of the railroad cut and didn't blink. The Brotherhood of the Hat. Here is how that inclusion played out after the smoke cleared. The shared sacrifice. The 147th New York lost about 75% of its men in the first few hours. The Wisconsin boys knew that if the 147th hadn't held that right flank, the 6th Wisconsin would have been surrounded and wiped out before they ever reached the railroad. The iron seal of approval. In the letters and memoirs written by the Wisconsin soldiers like Rufus Dawes, they speak of the New York units with a level of respect they didn't give to anyone else. To a Wisconsin soldier, a New Yorker who could hold a line under that kind of fire was basically a Westerner at heart. Post-Gettysburg consolidation, when the brigade was reorganized because the numbers were so low, the 147th New York stayed in the same division. Even though they weren't technically part of the Iron Brigade on the official paperwork, they campaigned, marched, and bled right alongside them for the rest of the war. For your deep dive, if you want to drive home the least racist / most progressive point from earlier, the 6th Wisconsin and the New York units were both from states with heavy abolitionist movements. They share an ideological why for being there. While other units might have looked down on city boys from New York, the Wisconsin frontiersmen saw the 147th, who were mostly farmers from Oswego, as their own kind. The ultimate Spartan respect. There is a story that whenever the Iron Brigade marched past other units, they stayed silent and proud. But when they marched past the survivors of the 147th New York, they would give them a cheer. In the Civil War, a cheer from the Iron Brigade was the highest medal you could receive.